This show is brought to you by PivX, Private Instant Verified Transactions. With its groundbreaking zero-coin staking and masternodes, PivX is the top privacy currency. Feel free to trade some on Binance or Bittrex. And for more information, go to www.pivx.org.
Hello and welcome to Developers Corner with me, Cryptosi. And this is the first Developers Corner since our massive rebrand over to SmartReach. So this is the very first of a brand new series of Developers Corner where I meet with exciting developers and skilled developers within crypto and surrounding technologies. We discuss things in their GitHub, or we just discuss technologies in slightly greater depth than we do in ITK crypto. So without any further chit chat, I'd like to introduce the first guest to this Developers Corner, which is Alex Trottier. Alex, how are you doing?
Very good. Thank you for having me today.
Great. So Alex, could you tell me just a little bit about yourself and your background within programming?
Yeah, so I've been programming for the last 3 to 5 years. I kind of started as a systems administrator for a company managing financial archives. And then with the whole ICO craze last year, I kind of took advantage of that to expand on my development capabilities and start writing actual software programs.
Okay, so I should have actually said at the top that Alex, you specialize in IPFS. So could you just, most people will either know about IPFS or they absolutely won't. So could you just tell us a little bit about what IPFS actually is?
Yeah, so at a high level, you could kind of consider IPFS as like a single swarm BitTorrent cluster where everyone kind of participates, but it also leverages, developments in various P2P technologies over the last, say, 10 years and kind of takes all of the good ones and puts it all together and kind of into a single package.
Okay, so with IPFS, it's been around for a little. I've been aware of it for maybe about a year, maybe about 2 or 3 years now. So with IPFS, are there any apps that have it working in today? Any popular apps that people might have seen that actually incorporate IPFS technology?
So the biggest one, I think, is this nonprofit organization called Internet Archive. They're slowly moving their data set onto IPFS and surveying their entire website through IPFS as well. I think that's kind of the one that most people will recognize. Other than that, there's, projects like OpenBazaar, which leverage IPFS for the data storage.
Do you know what? I wasn't aware that OpenBazaar actually used IPFS. Have they had that built in from their first release, or have they added that later on?
It's pretty new. It only started with version 2, which I think came out earlier this year. But yeah, other than that, it's quite new. Okay,
yeah. That'll probably be why I didn't realize. IPFS is quite a big deal, I think. Generally, we talk about crypto and how the two things can be combined. With IPFS, we know what its strengths are, but what do you think are the main drawbacks for IPFS?
So I think right now, mostly with kind of any software project, once it's very early on in its lifetime, there's unoptimizations, there's, bugs that occur. So I think the biggest issue is that it's pretty new. And as such, there's a lot of uncharted territory that goes along with, the software development.
Have there been any horror stories or any really, I've not come across any real horror stories of people having serious issues with IPFS?
No, I mean the biggest horror story is that it can be very, very slow at times. If you're kind of looking for data that isn't very popular, it can, take 5 minutes just to find the peer that is providing that data. But in the long term, those kind of slow aspects will go away.
That's absolutely no different to BitTorrent, no, because with BitTorrent, I guess everybody's quite aware that when you're trying to download something, if it's a rare file, it will take loads longer than if it's a popular file. So I guess it's no different to BitTorrent, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it kind of suffers from some of the same issues that BitTorrent has.
Okay, so there are some other technologies that are used for storage. Another popular one is one which I believe was designed by Zuko from Zcash, which is called Tahoe Labs. Now, how does IPFS differ from technologies like Tahoe Labs?
So I think IPFS, is very viable to kind of replace the way we transport data when browsing the internet. I think IPFS is also very useful for building dApps on platforms like Ethereum, whereas Tahoe is more suitable for, data storage in general or archiving documents.
Is that because of the speed at which the two operate, or why in particular is that?
That's a very good question. I think that's just mostly due to the way IPFS is designed. It's kind of more web friendly than Tahoe is. It's also there's more APIs and everything for IPFS as well that you can use when you're kind of like browsing the internet.
Okay. There was a project which I should have got you to introduce earlier on, but I guess this is as good a time as any. But the project is called Temporal. So could you tell me a little bit about Temporal and how it works?
Yeah, so the main thing with Temporal is kind of creating tools for various protocols like IPFS and kind of building out the ecosystem for IPFS. That's like another one of the big issues is that there's not a lot of tooling for developers to use. Kind of you have to, dive through documentation that is sometimes out of date or just not very well written. And it can be very, very hard to use as well. So that's kind of what we're trying to do with Temporal, is make it easier for people to use IPFS, but also building out the infrastructure for IPFS.
That does sound very much like crypto. Generally in crypto, we have the same problem that most documentation is out of date days or weeks later because things just develop so fast. So I guess it would be the same with IPFS. So the first thing I want to ask about is something I'm very interested in personally is privacy. So how does a project like Temporal plan to tackle privacy? Are files being encrypted prior to being uploaded, and how does it work?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. In the case of IPFS, it's not really issues with IPFS, it's more so how it works, that it's not necessarily the greatest thing for data that you don't want anyone to ever have access to. But we kind of follow, typical privacy laws where we don't do any kind of metadata analysis. We don't collect information on users. We don't sell information to third parties, but we allow people to encrypt content they want uploaded to IPFS before it ever touches the IPFS network. And we also kind of do just, general privacy methods such as storage volume encryption.
Excellent. Okay, so somebody who wanted to start interacting with Temporal, and what languages would a developer need to know? What would be the best languages?
So that's one of the things we kind of had in mind when we were designing Temporals, that we didn't want to exclude people just because you use a different programming language. So the core method of using Temporal is basic HTTP get, put, and delete requests, which I think any language can use. We also have a web interface for people that aren't super technical, but we will have client libraries coming out in languages like Golang as well.
Excellent. Okay, back to IPFS. With the hosts, the people who host these things, host the data, how are they incentivized? So basically what I'm asking is, what's in it for them when they are hosting people's data?
So they're nothing really. I mean, IPFS, there is no incentivization mechanisms built into it. So basically, you either have to run your own node, find someone altruistic enough to host your data for free, or pay a third-party service to store your data. There is a blockchain coming out called Filecoin, which is being developed by the company behind IPFS. And they're using IPFS as the storage mechanism, but they're using the blockchain for incentivizing people to store data.
Okay, so IPFS was actually launched by a bona fide company. Was the company set up purely to launch IPFS, or is it a company that I would have heard of?
So the company is called Protocol Labs. They're basically developing a bunch of really cool technologies that are underneath IPFS, but there's also a very, very vibrant open source community with quite a lot of contributors as well.
What does IPFS stand for?
Interplanetary File System.
See, now I thought that was a joke answer when I when I read it the first time. what is the thinking behind it being interplanetary?
So the idea is basically that you can kind of, use IPFS across quite a big distance, like in between various planets as well. There was a very good talk by Juan Bennett, the guy who came up with IPFS, where he kind of describes this, utopian future where people on Mars would need access to data, and it wouldn't be viable to always have to, travel back to Earth to retrieve your data. IPFS kind of creates this foundation that you can exchange data like in between planets, basically, without needing to kind of suffer from the current, centralization of the modern internet.
Oh, excellent. That ties in perfectly well with crypto, and it sounds like it's pretty much future-proof if we're going to be able to send data to planets that we haven't traveled to yet, which is great.
Yes. Yeah, it's actually very cool too. They kind of have this specification called multi-format, which allows you to have, content or hashing basically that is upgradable in the future should current hashing algorithms become broken, but it also does so in like a backward compatible way.
Okay. That sounds cool. Right. Okay. So when we were preparing this podcast, we spoke about some possible use cases. So we identified 3 use cases. So that we're going to go ahead and speak about them one by one. So the first possible use case is for storing and sharing network-related data. So people familiar with projects like PivX and Dash will know about their governance systems and how these governance systems require users to share information, which may be pictures, videos even, and text. Would IPFS be a good decentralized solution for this? What do you think, Alex?
This podcast has been brought to you by Rhubarb Media. Rhubarb Media are the branding specialists behind successful crypto projects such as PivX, Vendible, and Libertaria. The Rhubarb style is both loved and respected the world over. So if you want your project to appeal to techies and everyday users alike, give Rhubarb Media a try. You cannot possibly be disappointed. Link is in the description.
I think it'd be very useful. I mean, you can, embed IPFS into the masternodes as well, kind of solving the issue with nobody hosting your data. But because it's content addressed as well, you can kind of create very lightweight pieces of data that you store on the blockchain to reference the files that are off chain without having to, put a video on the blockchain or anything like that.
Okay, so what you're saying is basically you can have something that points to where the actual video is stored so that you don't end up storing gigabytes worth of video on the blockchain, which will bloat it beyond recognition. Is that about right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you just store a small piece of text.
Right. So we was considering a potential attack vectors. So with IPFS, can a host alter the data or delete it? Is this possible? And if it's not, what prevents a host from doing this?
So you can alter data in the sense that, you can download a piece of content, change it, and then re-upload it. But because you've changed it, even with so much as like a single bit, you will have a completely different content hash. So you can't really, overwrite the previous data that was there since it's referred to by a completely different name. You also can't necessarily delete data. What you can do is stop hosts from pinning the data. And then if nobody pins it, the content kind of disappears. So in theory, you could do targeted host attacks on all the masternodes that are hosting the data, but it's not very practical.
Okay, so I would assume for something like that, you'd have to find out all of the masternode hosts' IP addresses and then target them that way. How would you find out the hosts?
Yeah, I mean, you can basically, I guess, just find out all the IP addresses of the masternodes and I guess attack each IP individually. But I don't think you're kind of exposing any greater amount of risk to the masternodes than they already have. So you're not necessarily kind of creating new attack surfaces.
No, you're right. Okay, and we could. So basically, I'm thinking of like the actual implementation, it would be something as simple as when somebody does put forward a proposal, instead of them having what they would usually have, which is a HTTP link to a forum address or something like that, they would have the IPFS hash link to where all of the information is stored via IPFS, which could be text plus pictures plus videos, and those could all be instantly retrieved from the client's wallet, from the actual PivX or Dash wallet. Does that sound realistic?
Exactly. You could basically, have all masternodes running IPFS, and then anytime someone submits a new proposal, the masternodes can pin it, and then when you go to download that data, you'll be downloading it from all the masternodes as well, as opposed to just one server hosted in the cloud. So it'll be
how processing intensive is running IPFS. So these masternodes, what sort of would you, for example, could you run an IPFS node on a Raspberry Pi?
Yeah, I mean, you could run an IPFS node on a Raspberry Pi. However, at the moment, because it's fairly new technology, there is some optimizations that can still be made, and there can be sometimes significant CPU utilization.
Okay, so what may be an issue is that the masternodes themselves may have to upgrade the resources to run the actual IPFS, which may slightly raise their cost of running. So that's the only thing I'm thinking of with that use case. Do you think that would be an issue, or do you think it would be quite small?
I mean, do you know, like, offhand what the typical resource requirements are for a masternode?
I do not.
Yeah, we would definitely, I don't know either, so we would have to find that out. But from my understanding, from what I've read, the masternodes should already be powerful enough to handle IPFS.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess we'll have to dive into that in more depth when we eventually, or if we eventually put some sort of proposal forward to add IPFS to one of these projects, which I can imagine will happen sooner rather than later, because it just makes sense. Okay. So
yeah, it really does.
Yeah. So onto possible use case number 2. So this one is for IPFS to store a backup of the client wallet in case GitHub goes down or becomes hostile. So by the client wallet, what I mean is the code to install and run your own wallet. In case GitHub goes down or becomes hostile, this location is then referenced in case of an emergency and no other trusted source can be found. So do you think this is a realistic use case, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, there's already kind of tools that you can use to import your Git repos onto IPFS. So, you could, in theory, move the Dash GitHub all to IPFS.
Oh, so this already exists. And I'd assume some projects are probably taking advantage of this already then.
I can't think of any major projects that are doing this, but the capability to do it has been out for, I think, at least over a year.
Okay. I guess because you have private repos, which pretty much every developer kind of has to have, there's not really that much of a demand for it from a developer's point of view. And I suppose end users will just get the wallets downloaded from the developers. So I guess that it's one of those things. It can be done, but I suppose it's not really that needed, is it?
Yeah, I mean, it can be done. Whether or not it's needed, like right now, I'm not too certain about that.
Okay, so let's rattle on to the final possible use case, which is use case number 3. So this was one that I concocted myself. So the blockchain is stored on IPFS and offered as a snapshot, which is quicker to download than regular syncing, which can take up to 24 hours. This snapshot is kept up to date by masternodes, and the location of this snapshot is constantly held in the wallet software. Seeing as the file itself never changes its name, but it does change data, would it be possible using IPFS? And if not, why not?
Yeah, so the one thing to keep in mind is that IPFS by default doesn't have like the concept of file names. So anytime, you alter the data, you would get a completely different content hash. But IPFS has a technology called the interplanetary name system that allows you to use the hashes of your public keys the same way you use, addresses and PIVX to map content hashes to a singular entity. So that kind of gives you an immutable link to changing content hashes. However, at the moment, it's pretty slow. So this is something that I would, see being extremely useful probably a year from now, but kind of due to the slowness of some parts of the IPFS ecosystem at the moment, it probably isn't a very good idea.
Okay. What sort of speeds do you get when you're uploading to IPFS, and what affects the speeds when you're uploading to IPFS? Is it just generally the same as uploading normally?
So in my experience, when I say like taking a file that has never been stored on IPFS before and I'm storing that on IPFS, it is extremely quick. It's often a lot quicker to upload than traditional upload methods. However, if you're pinning a piece of content that someone else has already uploaded, depending, on how many peers you have, how many peers are pinning that content, it can be a little slower to access.
Okay. Excellent. All right. So, Alex, thank you so much for your time. I've got just two final housekeeping questions, which were submitted by the SmartReach community. And the first one is, what do you think is the most exciting use case overall for IPFS?
I think, quite honestly, I think it's kind of the next step up from HTTP as it is now. And I think it has extreme potential to kind of take the architecture of the internet, which is very centralized, reliant on, backbone links between countries and companies like Google to host all the data, into a very decentralized architecture where anyone can, play their part in maintaining the internet and keeping it alive.
Okay, this is going to sound like a politically charged question, but I was recently watching a program where they spoke about Swift. Oh no, it was a podcast where they spoke about Swift, and they said that Swift had been militarized. So what certain nations could do is apply sanctions so that people no longer have bank accounts or can't make transfers via banking in countries like Iran. Could you imagine that something like that could happen with the internet as we have it now, where a certain country may say, okay, we're applying sanctions, so we're going to switch off your internet, this whatever nation it is? And do you think something like IPFS heavily mitigates or even just stops that from being an option for these sorts of attacks?
Yeah, absolutely. It 100% does. So the very cool thing about that is, let's say, you have two IPFS nodes, one in Iran and one in Canada, and Iran shuts off the link from Canada to Iran. As long as that one node in Iran is hosting the data, it can then spread it to all other people in Iran. So it's very useful for journalists in hostile countries to say distribute their data across multiple peers within their own local network, despite not having, connection to the internet at large.
I see. And do you think it's actually been used for this already? Do you think there are people that are using this maybe in, I don't know, to get around the Great Wall of China, for example? Are there people that are using this sort of technology now?
I'm not too sure about that, to be honest. IPFS is still, pretty new. That I don't think these kind of use cases have been explored in like practicality. I think, they've been explored in theory, but it's just really a matter of time before someone tries to, implement this stuff.
Okay. All right. And for the final one, which is more of a personal question, what are your future plans for yourself and for Rtrade within crypto and data storage? What sorts of things have you got planned?
Yeah, so IPFS isn't the only distributed storage protocol. There's a lot of new promising ones that are emerging, like Storj. And one of the things we want to do with Temporal is, not restrict people's options. We want people to be able to use, whatever storage protocol they want, basically. So we're continually looking at new protocols that come out to see whether or not they're, worth the integration time. But one of the kind of long-term projects of ours is to explore data archiving using services like Hyperledger and IPFS.
Excellent. Alex, thank you so much for devoting your time to this first episode of Developers Corner. It's been amazing having you on, and hopefully we'll get you back on in a few months' time to find out what sorts of developments you've made and what inroads you've made with IPFS and other distributed storage technologies. Would that be all right?
Yes, that would. This was quite a lot of fun.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Alex.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye.
This show is brought to you by PIVX, Private Instant Verified Transactions. With its groundbreaking zero-coin staking and masternodes, PIVX is the top privacy currency. Feel free to trade some on Binance or Bittrex. And for more information, go to www.pivx.org.